An exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. It was supposed to be just a contract, a marriage of convenience. But her gaze revealed a forbidden desire and a past that could ruin everything. Now they're living a love that should never have existed. Watch this story to the end, you'll be surprised by it. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The smell of cheap alcohol and disinfectant always reminded Hannah Davis of home. Not the home she never had, but the feeling of always being about to flee from somewhere. At 34, she had grown accustomed to this constant restlessness, to the sensation of living in a permanent state of alertness. The Blue Lagoon bar, where she had worked for 6 months, was no different from other places she'd passed through, a temporary refuge where she could hide behind rehearsed smiles and superficial conversations. It was Thursday, almost midnight, and business had decreased considerably. Hannah was cleaning glasses with mechanical movements, lost in thoughts she preferred not to visit. The muffled sound of ambient music, mixed with the sparse conversations of the last customers, creating an atmosphere of urban melancholy typical of New York. She liked these quieter moments. It was when she could breathe without feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Another beer, please." The deep voice made her look up. The man had been sitting in the corner of the bar for more than an hour, always ordering the same thing, always paying without looking at the change. Hannah had noticed this because, after years of being invisible, she had developed a peculiar ability to observe people who also seemed to want to disappear. He was different from the regular patrons. The suit was expensive. She recognized the impeccable cut and quality fabric even in the dim light of the Uwam bar. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it several times. There was something familiar about that face, though Hannah was certain she had never seen him before. "Sure," she served the beer, noticing he had barely touched the previous one. "Are you okay?" The question came out before she could control herself. Hannah rarely got involved with customers beyond what was necessary. She had learned that curiosity was a luxury she couldn't afford. But there was something about this man that intrigued her. Perhaps it was the way he looked at his own reflection in the beer glass, or the way his fingers drummed on the counter, following a rhythm only he knew. Elijah Carson raised his eyes and, for the first time that night, really saw her. Hannah felt a shiver run down her spine. Not of fear, but of recognition. It was the look of someone who knew intimate loneliness, the kind that lives in your chest and whispers in your ears during the early hours. They stared at each other. For a few seconds that seemed eternal, two strangers united by an invisible wound that neither could name. "Do you always ask that to customers?" He took a small sip, keeping his eyes fixed on her. "No." Hannah dried her hands on her apron, feeling a strange need to be honest. "But you seem lost." Elijah almost smiled. Almost. Lost is an interesting word. I'd say I'm exactly where I need to be. And where is that? Far from home. Hannah understood. She too was always far from home, even when she was in it. There was something universally recognizable in the way certain people carried their burdens, always at a safe distance from any place they could call their own. "New York can be a good place to hide," she said, cleaning the already clean counter. "Big enough for no one to find you, small enough for you not to get completely lost. You speak like someone with experience." "Everyone here does." Hannah gestured vaguely toward the half-empty bar. "It's not exactly the kind of place where happy people come to spend the night." This time Elijah really smiled. It was a sad smile, loaded with an irony that Hannah immediately recognized. It was the same smile she used when someone asked if she was okay, a polite lie wrapped in a facial expression. "What's your name?" he asked. "Hannah." "Hannah." He repeated the name as if testing the sound in his own voice. "It's a beautiful name. Strong. It was my grandmother's name. She was the only strong person I knew." Hannah didn't know why she was sharing this. Perhaps it was the late hour or the way he looked at her, without judgment, just with a genuine curiosity she wasn't used to receiving. "Was? She died when I was 15. Cancer." Hannah put away the cloth she was using, an unconscious gesture she always made when the subject approached dangerous territory. "And you? Do you have a name, or do you prefer to continue being the mysterious—" "A man in the expensive suit." Elijah. He extended his hand, a formal gesture that seemed out of place in the casual atmosphere of the bar. Hannah hesitated for a moment before accepting it. The handshake was firm but not domineering, a surprise, considering she was used to men who greeted as if they were marking territory. "Nice to meet you, Elijah." His hand was warm, and Hannah felt a small electric discharge run through her arm when their fingers touched. It was just a second, but it was enough time for her to realize that she hadn't felt this kind of physical connection with someone for a long time. Since the divorce, she had become an expert at avoiding any kind of intimacy, even the most casual. "The pleasure is mine, Hannah." They remained with their hands joined for longer than would be considered appropriate between strangers. Hannah was the first to pull away, pretending she needed to check something at the register. Elijah went back to drinking his beer, but she could feel his gaze following each of her movements. "Have you worked here for a long time?" he asked when she returned to the counter. 6 months. Before that, I moved around a lot." Hannah didn't go into details about the jobs she had lost, about the times she had to run away in the middle of the night, about the years trying to rebuild a life that seemed determined to crumble every time she thought she was getting close to stability. "I understand." And by the way he said it, Hannah had the impression that he really did understand. Sometimes changing is the only way to keep moving. "Exactly." Hannah was surprised by the accuracy of the observation. "You seem to understand a lot about running away from things." "I don't run away," Elijah said, spinning the glass between his hands. "I strategically distance myself." Hannah laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised her. It had been a long time since she had really laughed, and the sound seemed strange, coming from her own throat. "That's an elegant way of saying you run away like everyone else." "Maybe." He finished his beer and placed the glass on the counter. "But I do it with style. And modesty too, I see." "Modesty is overrated." Hannah was about to respond when she felt a familiar presence approaching. She didn't need to look to know it was Mark, the bar owner, returning from his cigarette break. She knew his footsteps, the way he walked when he had drunk a little more than he should, which happened almost every night. "Hannah, love, it's time to close," Mark said, but his attention was clearly focused on Elijah. Hannah could see the gears working in her boss's head, the expensive clothes, the watch that was probably worth more than the entire bar, the posture of someone used to having money. "Of course, Mark." Hannah began collecting empty glasses from the other tables. "I'm just finishing up here." Elijah stood up, taking his wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket. Hannah noticed that he always paid in cash, always large bills, always without expecting change. It was the kind of behavior that aroused curiosity in places like this. "How much for the bill?" he asked. $25, Mark answered before Hannah could speak, approaching with the self-interested smile she knew well. Elijah placed a $50 bill on the counter. "Keep the change." "Thank you very much, Mr. Mark extended, his hand clearly expecting an introduction. "Good night," Elijah said, simply ignoring the gesture. His eyes met Hannah's once more. "See you soon, Hannah." He left without looking back, leaving behind only the subtle scent of an expensive cologne and a strange feeling in the air. Hannah watched him through the foggy storefront until he disappeared into the darkness of the street. "Who was that?" Mark asked, keeping the $50 bill as if it were a trophy. "A customer," Hannah replied, going back to the cleaning work. "No big deal." But she knew she was lying. It had been something, yes. She just didn't know what yet. During the 3 weeks that followed, Elijah returned to the bar every Thursday. Always at the same time, always ordering the same thing. He would sit in the same place, maintain the same reserved posture. But his conversations with Hannah became progressively longer and more personal. Hannah discovered that he was 40 years old, that he ran a company she had never heard of, but that must be important, considering the way Mark practically bowed whenever he appeared. She also discovered that he had lost his wife 5 years ago, that he lived alone in an apartment that was too big, and that he had the habit of working late to avoid going home. In exchange, she shared small pieces of her own story. She talked about dance, about how she had dreamed of being a ballerina before life took charge of showing that some dreams were luxuries that people like her couldn't afford. She told him about the marriage that had been more of a prison than a home, about her mother who lived in an expensive clinic that drained all her savings. "Why do you keep paying?" Elijah had asked the previous Thursday. "From your accounts, your mother was never exactly present." Hannah had thought about the question for a long time before answering. "Because it's the only thing I have left of her that isn't pain. The hope that maybe, if she gets better, I can have a real conversation with my mother before it's too late." "Hope can be a dangerous thing," he had said, and there was something in his voice that suggested personal experience with the subject. "It can be, but it's the only thing that keeps me functioning." Now, on the following Thursday, Hannah found herself waiting for his arrival with an anxiety that made her uncomfortable. She had grown accustomed to those conversations, to the way Elijah really listened when she spoke, as if her words had weight and importance. It was a sensation she wasn't used to, and it scared her as much as it attracted her. He arrived punctually at 11:30, as always, but this time there was something different in his posture, a tension that wasn't there in previous weeks, a kind of determination that made Hannah realize that something had changed. "The usual beer?" she asked when he sat down. "Actually, no." Elijah adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture she had never seen before. "Today I need something stronger, and I need to talk to you." Hannah felt her stomach contract. In her experience, when men said they needed to talk to her, it was rarely for something good. "All right. What would you like to drink?" "Whiskey." "And can you sit with me?" Hannah looked around. The bar was emptier than usual, just two other customers who seemed more interested in their own problems than anything else. Mark was in the office, probably doing the day's accounts. "I think I can take a quick break," she said, serving the whiskey and getting a glass of water for herself. She sat on the stool beside him, keeping a certain distance but close enough that their conversations wouldn't be overheard by others. "Hannah," Elijah began, spinning the glass between his hands without drinking, "I need to ask you a question, and before I ask, I want you to know that there's no wrong answer. Whatever you decide will be respected." Hannah's heart accelerated. "You're scaring me, Elijah." "That's not my intention." He finally took a sip of the whiskey, making a slight grimace. "Have you heard of Carson Holdings?" Hannah shook her head negatively. "Should I have?" "Maybe not. It's an investment company, quite large. I'm the CEO. Hannah blinked, processing the information. She had imagined he had money, but CEO of a large company was a completely different category. "Oh. 5 years ago, when my wife died, I focused exclusively on work. I avoided any kind of relationship, any social commitment that wasn't strictly professional." Elijah paused, carefully, choosing his words. "Recently, this has become a problem." "How so?" "The other partners started to question my stability. A single man for 5 years with no known relationships, who works 16 hours a day and avoids any social contact, they started to think this affects my leadership capacity." Hannah frowned. "That's ridiculous." "It is, but it's corporate reality." Elijah finished his whiskey in one go. "There's a clause in the partnership agreement that allows the other partners to question the leadership if there are doubts about the CEO's emotional stability. They activated that clause." "And what does that mean?" "It means that if I don't prove I'm capable of maintaining a stable and healthy relationship in the next 6 months, I could lose control of the company I built from nothing." Hannah began to understand where the conversation was going, and the feeling in her stomach got worse. "Elijah, I need a girlfriend," he said directly. "Someone who can appear with me at social events, who can convince everyone that I'm fine, stable, happy, someone who can play that role for 6 months. And you're asking me, and I'm offering you a job." Hannah stood up abruptly, walking a few steps away from the counter. Her mind was racing, processing the implications of what he was suggesting. "You want to pay me to pretend I'm your girlfriend?" I want to pay you to help me save my company. Elijah turned on the stool to face her. $75,000 for 6 months. Half now, half when it's all over. Hannah felt her legs wobble. $75,000 was more money than she had seen together in her entire life. It was enough to pay off her mother's clinic debts, to get a decent apartment, to start over without the crushing weight of overdue bills. I don't know anything about being a CEO's girlfriend, she said, still with her back to him. You would know how to be yourself. That's what I need. Why me? Hannah turned to face him. You could find any woman in New York willing to do this. Women who know how to behave in these environments, who have the proper education, who don't work in decaying bars. Because you are real, Elijah said simply. Because when you smile, it's genuine. Because you don't want anything from me besides an honest conversation. Because you understand what it's like to carry too much weight on your shoulders. Hannah felt tears threatening to appear. It had been a long time since anyone had really seen her, since anyone had recognized what she carried. And what if I can't? What if I don't know how to play this role? Then we'll try together. Elijah stood up, slowly approaching her. Hannah, I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, just by my side. Would there be physical expectations? None. The answer was immediate and firm. It would be purely professional, maybe a kiss, or two in public, hugs for photos, but nothing beyond that. Nothing you don't feel comfortable doing. Hannah looked at her own hands, at the bitten nails and calluses from years working in jobs that required physical strength. She tried to imagine those hands holding champagne flutes at elegant events, tried to see herself wearing expensive clothes and smiling for photographers. I'd need time to think. Of course. But Hannah, Elijah took a card from his pocket and placed it on the counter. If you accept, your life will change for the better, I can guarantee that. Hannah took the card. It was heavy, with his name printed in discreet gold letters. Elijah Carson, CEO, it said. There was a phone number and an address that she recognized as being in one of the most expensive areas of the city. You have until Sunday to decide, he said, placing some bills on the counter to pay for the drink. If you accept, call me. If you don't accept, I completely understand and will never bother you with this again. And if I say no, will you still keep coming here on Thursdays? Elijah hesitated, and Hannah saw something vulnerable pass across his face. Honestly? Probably. Not, it would be too difficult. Hannah understood. Those Thursday conversations had become important to her too, and the idea of losing them made her realize how much she had grown accustomed to his presence. I'll think about it, she finally said. That's all I can ask. Elijah headed for the sea door but stopped before leaving. Hannah? Yes? Regardless of your decision, I want you to know that these conversations, they meant a lot to me. They were the first times in 5 years that I managed to talk about Claire without feeling like I was drowning. He left before she could respond, leaving Hannah alone with the card in her hand and a whirlwind of emotions in her chest. She looked around the bar, the peeling walls, the smell of alcohol and disinfectant, the constant feeling of just surviving instead of really living. $75,000. 6 months, a chance to start over. But also the chance to get involved with a man who was clearly still dealing with the loss of his wife, in a situation that could easily get complicated in ways she couldn't even imagine. Hannah put the card in her pocket and finished cleaning the bar, but her thoughts were miles away, revolving around a question that she knew would change her life regardless of the answer she chose to give. On Saturday morning, Hannah woke up earlier than usual. She had slept poorly, her dreams populated by confused images of expensive dresses and elegant halls, interspersed with nightmares about her mother and medical bills that accumulated like insurmountable mountains. She made coffee in the electric coffee maker she had bought used a few months ago, one of the few luxuries she had allowed herself since she started working at the bar. The strong aroma filled the small room she called home, a space of 200 square feet in the back of a former dance academy that had closed the previous year. Hannah sat in the only chair she owned and took Elijah's card, which had been on the bedside table all night. The gold letters shone in the weak morning light, reminding her that there existed a world very different from hers, a world where people had elegant business cards and offered amounts she could barely comprehend. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was the clinic where her mother was interned. "Ms. Hannah, this is Nurse Carla from St. Teresa Clinic." Hannah's heart raced. Calls from the clinic were never good news. "Is there a problem with my mother?" "Not exactly, but we need to talk about the financial situation. Can you come here today?" Hannah closed her eyes. She knew what this meant. The bills were late again, and they were considering transferring her mother to the public system. "Of course. I can be there in 2 hours." "Perfect. We'll see you in the administrative office." Hannah hung up the phone and looked at Elijah's card again. The universe had a cruel sense of humor sometimes. St. Teresa Clinic was in the west side of New York, in a neighborhood that tried to project an image of discreet elegance, but couldn't completely hide the urban deterioration around it. Hannah knew the way by heart. 3 buses and a 15-minute walk that she made at least twice a week for the past 2 years. Nurse Carla received her in the administrative office with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hannah had dealt with her several times over the months, and there was always an unspoken tension between them. The nurse doing her job of collecting payment, Hannah trying to explain a financial situation that she herself could barely understand. "Ms. Hannah, thank you for coming so quickly." Carla gestured for her to sit in the chair facing the desk. "I'll be direct because I know you appreciate honesty." Hannah prepared for the worst. "We have 3 months of payments in arrears. The total amount, including interest and penalties, is $42,000. The number landed in Hannah's stomach like a punch. She knew she was behind, but she didn't imagine it had reached so much. I didn't know it was that much. I understand that it's difficult, but the clinic's management can no longer accept this situation. We need a definitive position by Monday." "What kind of position?" "Either you pay off at least half the debt and present a viable plan for the rest, or we'll need to refer your mother to the public system." Hannah knew what this meant. She had visited public psychiatric hospitals before, when looking for a place for her mother. They were places where people were stored, not treated, where her mother would be completely lost in the system, where the small improvements she had made in recent months would disappear. Can I see my mother?" Hannah asked in a weak voice. "Of course. She's in the garden, as usual." Hannah found her mother sitting on the same bench where she always found her, facing a rose bed that had been planted the year before. Rose Davis was 58 years old, but looked 80. The medications and the illness had stolen the vivacity from her eyes, replacing it with a distant expression that broke Hannah's heart every time. "Mom?" Hannah sat next to her on the bench. Rose turned slowly, and Hannah saw a flash of recognition in her eyes. "Hannah, you came to visit me." "I always come, Mom. Every week." "That's true." Rose smiled, a fragile but genuine smile. "You're a good girl, Hannah. You always were." It was one of the rare times when her mother recognized her completely, and Hannah felt tears threatening to appear. For years, before the hospitalization, Rose had been a distant and submissive figure, always too concerned with the problems of her own internal world to notice that her daughter was growing up without guidance, without affection, without protection. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "What is it, dear?" Maybe things have to change a little, but I promise I'll take care of you. Always." Rose held Hannah's hand with fragile fingers. "You've always taken care of me, Hannah, even when I didn't deserve it." This time, Hannah couldn't hold back the tears. "You always deserved it, Mom. I just didn't know how to do it right." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the roses sway slightly in the afternoon breeze. Hannah tried to record that moment in her memory, her mother's fragile hand in hers, the smell of the flowers, the rare feeling of peace that came from the genuine connection between them. When she returned home that night, Hannah knew what she had to do. She took Elijah's card and dialed the number before she could change her mind. He answered on the second ring. "Hannah? How did you know it was me?" "Hope," he said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. "Have you decided?" "I accept." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" "No, but I accept anyway." "Why?" Hannah looked around her small room, at the peeling walls and the window that faced a dark alley. She thought of her mother in the clinic garden, of the possibility of having to see her waste away in a public hospital, of the life she was living that was more survival than real existence. "Because I need to," she said simply. "And because I think you need it too." "I do need it," he admitted, "more than I imagined." "What happens now?" "Now we begin. Can you be free tomorrow? We need to talk about the details, about how everything will work." "I can." "Great. I'll send a car to pick you up at 2 in the afternoon. We'll have lunch and plan how we're going to save my company. And my life," Hannah added softly. "And your life," he agreed. "Hannah?" "Yes?" "Thank you. For accepting, for trusting me, for everything." After they hung up, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what she had just done. In less than 24 hours, her life had completely changed. She didn't know if she had made the smartest or the stupidest decision of her life, but for the first time in years, she felt something she had forgotten existed. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, this hope wasn't the dangerous thing Elijah had said it was. Maybe it was exactly what they both needed to start living again. The car that Elijah sent to pick up Hannah was the kind of vehicle she had only seen in movies. Black, with dark windows and beige leather interior that smelled of new money. The driver, a middle-aged man named Robert, was polite but discreet, treating her with a professional courtesy that made her feel as if she were playing a role for which she hadn't rehearsed. During the journey through the streets of New York, Hannah observed the city gradually changing. They left the narrow streets and old buildings of downtown, passed through middle-class neighborhoods with their uniform buildings, until they reached the Upper East Side, where houses hid behind high walls and vegetation was carefully planned to look natural. The restaurant where Elijah waited was on the top floor of an elegant commercial building with a panoramic view of the city. Hannah had exchanged her usual outfit, faded jeans and a simple t-shirt, for a black dress she had bought years ago for a wedding and worn only twice since then. Even so, she felt out of place among the tables occupied by people in expensive suits and dresses that clearly cost more than she earned in a month. Elijah stood up when he saw her approach, and Hannah noticed how some other customers looked discreetly in their direction. He wore a navy blue suit that enhanced the color of his eyes, and there was something different in his posture, more confident, more in control. It was as if being in that environment transformed him into the public version of himself. "You, look beautiful," he said, lightly kissing her cheek in a gesture that seemed natural, but that she knew was part of the performance. "Thank you." Hannah sat in the chair he pulled out for her, trying not to show the nervousness she felt. "This place is impressive. It's discreet, perfect for important conversations." Elijah sat across from her, and Hannah noticed how he had chosen a table in the corner, away from other customers but still visible enough for those who wanted to observe. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly, terrified." Elijah smiled, a genuine smile that reminded her of the nights at the bar. "That's normal. Let's take it slow." The waiter approached, an older man who clearly knew Elijah and treated him with the deference reserved for important customers. Elijah ordered a bottle of wine that Hannah had never heard of, and she tried not to show surprise when she saw the price on the menu. "First lesson," Elijah said when they were alone. "In this world, everything is theater. People observe every gesture, every expression, every word. They draw conclusions based on details you don't even imagine they're noticing." "Like what?" "The way you hold the wine glass if you wait for me to taste it before drinking. How you treat the waiters, if you know the names of expensive dishes." Elijah leaned slightly forward. "But the good news is that you don't need to pretend to be someone you're not. You just need to be the best version of yourself." Hannah took the glass the waiter had served, holding it the way she had seen in movies. And if the best version of myself isn't good enough? It is. The answer came, without hesitation. Hannah, these people are not better than you. They just had different opportunities. During lunch, Elijah explained the details of the agreement. There would be social events, business dinners, charity parties, art gallery openings. Hannah would need an adequate wardrobe, which he would provide. There would be basic training on social etiquette and information about the company and the main players in the financial market. As for us, he said, carefully cutting a piece of salmon, we need to create a convincing story. How we met, how long we've been together, our plans for the future. What kind of plans? Nothing too specific, just enough to convince people that we're a stable and committed couple. Elijah paused. There's an important thing I need to tell. You. Hannah felt her stomach contract. What? My wife, Claire, was very well known in New York social circles. She came from a traditional family, was involved in several charity organizations. When she died, it caused a lot of interest from the media and from people close to us. And some people will inevitably compare you to her. They'll try to find similarities or differences. They'll speculate about how I went from her to you. Elijah put his fork on the plate, looking directly at Hannah. I want you to be prepared for that. Hannah felt a pang of something she couldn't immediately identify. Jealousy. Insecurity. What was she like? Different from you, Elijah said simply, in almost every aspect. Is that good or bad? It's the truth. Hannah realized that he wasn't going to elaborate on the subject, at least not at that moment. There was a tension in his shoulders when he talked about Claire, a rigidity that wasn't present in other conversations. We have our first event next Friday, he continued, changing the subject. A gala dinner to raise funds for Mount Sinai Hospital. It will be relatively small, about 200 people, and most will be from the medical or business area. A good test to start. What exactly do I need to do? Stay by my side, smile, make polite conversation about neutral subjects. If someone asks about your work, you can be honest, to a certain extent. Say that you're between projects, thinking about making a career transition. People will assume it's because now you have financial stability through me. Hannah made a face. That's kind of humiliating. It's the reality of this world. I'm not saying I agree with it, just that this is how it works. And what if someone asks me a question I don't know the answer to? You smile and deflect the conversation to the person who asked. People love talking about themselves. Ask about their work, about their children, about travels. It always works. After lunch, Elijah took her to a clothing store in a mall that Hannah knew only from hearing about, a place where the windows didn't display prices because anyone who needed to ask couldn't afford it. The saleswoman, an elegant woman of about 40, treated Hannah with a cold politeness that was clearly assessing whether she belonged in that environment. We need a complete wardrobe, Elijah told the saleswoman. Dresses for social events, elegant casual clothes, shoes, accessories. Of course, Mr. Carson, what kind of events? Gala dinners, cocktail parties, business lunches. She'll need at least 5 complete looks to start. Hannah observed the transformation in the saleswoman's attitude when she heard Elijah's last name. The smile became warmer, the posture more attentive. It was fascinating and a little depressing at the same time. I'll leave you at ease, Elijah said to Hannah. Choose what you like. If you need me, I'll be in the cafe across the way. It was clear that he had done this before. The instructions were given with a naturalness that suggested experience, and Hannah wondered if he had done the same thing. With Claire. Over the next 2 hours, Hannah tried on clothes that cost more than she earned in several months. Silk dresses that fell perfectly on her body. High-heeled shoes that made her feel tall and elegant. Delicate accessories that transformed any look from simple to sophisticated. You have very good taste, the saleswoman commented, as Hannah looked at herself in the mirror wearing an emerald green dress that made her look like a completely different person. And a perfect silhouette for these pieces. Hannah smiled, but inside she was mentally calculating the value of everything she had chosen. It was more money than she had spent on clothes in her entire adult life. When they left the store, With several bags that the driver carefully accommodated in the trunk, Elijah asked, "How was it?" "Surreal," Hannah answered honestly. "I never imagined I could look good in this kind of clothing." "You were always beautiful, Hannah. Now you just have the right tools to show it." There was something in the way he said this that made Hannah look at him more attentively. It wasn't just a polite comment. There was a sincerity there that made her feel butterflies in her stomach. "Where are we going now?" "My apartment. I need to show you some things, and you need to familiarize yourself with the environment. Some people from our social circle might be invited for dinners there." Elijah's apartment was in a building in the Upper East Side, an old construction that had been renovated to house only 6 apartments, each occupying an entire floor. The doorman greeted them by name, and Hannah noticed how he looked at her, with discreet but evident curiosity. The elevator was small and elegant, lined with wood and mirrors. During the ascent to the 8th floor, Hannah became painfully aware of the physical proximity between her and Elijah. She could smell his cologne, could see the reflection of the two of them in the mirror. Him tall and elegant, her trying to look confident in new shoes that still made her wobble slightly. "Nervous?" he asked, noticing how she played with the strap of her purse. "A little. It's normal. This place has a lot of history." When the elevator doors opened directly into the living room of the apartment, Hannah had to make a conscious effort not to let her jaw drop. The space was huge, with high ceilings and glass windows that went from floor to ceiling, offering a spectacular view of the city. The decoration was modern but cozy, with neutral tones broken by pieces of art that clearly had been chosen by someone with knowledge and good taste. "It's beautiful," she said, walking slowly through the living room. "Claire chose most of the decoration," Elijah said, observing her reaction. "I never had much talent for these things." Hannah stopped in front of a shelf that displayed several photographs in silver frames. Most showed Elijah with a blonde woman of delicate beauty and luminous smile. Claire had that kind of natural elegance that came from generations of good education and privilege, the kind of beauty that seemed to have been painted instead of photographed. "She was very beautiful," Hannah said, picking up one of the photos. "She was." Elijah approached, standing beside her. "This was taken on our honeymoon in Santorini." In the photo, Claire was laughing, with her hair in the wind and a flowing white dress. Elijah looked years younger, with a genuine smile that Hannah rarely saw in the man she knew now. "You looked very happy. We were. For a while." Hannah put the photo back in place but continued observing the other images. Claire at social events, Claire on exotic trips, Claire always beautiful, always smiling. It was impossible not to feel intimidated by the ghostly presence of that woman in the apartment. "Hannah." Elijah's voice made her turn. He was standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "I need you to understand something." "What?" "I'm not trying to replace Claire with you. This agreement, it has nothing to do with her." "Are you sure?" Hannah crossed her arms, a defensive reaction that she recognized but couldn't control. "Because it seems that your entire life still revolves around her memory." Elijah was silent for a long moment, processing her words. "Maybe you're right," he finally said. "But that doesn't change the fact that I need your help. And you need the money. We can make this work without complicating things." Hannah nodded, but inside she already knew that things were getting complicated. There was something in the way Elijah looked at her, in the way his voice changed when he talked to her, that suggested that the purely professional agreement they had established was beginning to transform into something different. "Do you want to see the rest of the apartment?" he asked. Elijah led her on a tour that revealed 3 bedrooms, one clearly the master, with a huge bed and an even more spectacular view of the city. There was an office with shelves full of economics books and biographies of famous businessmen, a guest room that seemed never to have been used, and a gourmet kitchen that was obviously used more by employees than by the owner. "Where would I stay?" Hannah asked. "If someone comes to dinner here?" "In the guest room." "But Hannah," Elijah hesitated. It may be that in some public situations, especially on business trips, we'll have to share accommodations, always with separate beds. Of course, but I understand. Hannah felt her face heat up. The idea of sleeping in the same room as Elijah, even in separate beds, made her nervous in a way she couldn't completely analyze. They returned to the main living room, where Elijah served 2 glasses of sparkling water from an expensive bottle that was in the refrigerator built into the bar. Hannah sat on the soft leather sofa, trying to process everything that had happened that day. "Is there anything else I need to know?" she asked. "Several things, but we can go slowly." Elijah sat in the armchair facing her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Hannah, can I ask you a personal question?" "I think so." "Why did you accept?" "The truth, not just the financial issue." Hannah looked at her own hands, thinking about the answer. "Because I'm tired of feeling invisible," she finally said. "Tired of being just someone who serves drinks, who cleans tables, who exists in the background of other people's lives. For 6 months I'll be important enough to stand beside someone like you in places like that restaurant. You were always important, Hannah." "To whom?" The question came out more bitter than she intended. "To my mother, who barely recognizes me. To my ex-husband, who treated me like property. To the bar customers, who barely look at my face when ordering a beer." Elijah leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "To me." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with a meaning that neither was ready to explore completely. Hannah felt something stir in her chest, a sensation she had buried so deeply that she had almost forgotten it existed. "Elijah. No, I shouldn't have said that." He stood up abruptly. "I'll take you home. You need to rest before Friday." During the way back, they maintained a polite conversation about practical details, where she would be picked up, what time the dress he had ordered would arrive, how communication between them would work during the week. But Hannah could feel an underlying tension, a mutual awareness that there was something unspoken developing between them. When the car stopped in front of the building where she lived, Elijah got out to accompany her to the door. It was a gesture that was probably part of his education, but it made Hannah feel special in a way she didn't expect. "Hannah," he said when they reached the entrance of the building, "thank you for today, for accepting this, for everything. You're welcome." She looked for her keys in her purse, trying not to look directly at him. "Elijah?" "Yes?" "That thing you said, about me being important to you?" "Yes?" "Did you mean it?" Elijah was silent for a moment, studying her face in the dim light of the street lamp. "More seriously than I should have," he finally said. Hannah nodded, not trusting her own voice, to respond. She opened the door of the building and turned to say goodbye, but Elijah was still standing there, watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Good night, Hannah." "Good night." She climbed the stairs to her small room, but stayed at the window watching until she saw Elijah's car disappear down the street. Only then did she allow herself to fully process what had happened that day. In a few hours, her life had changed radically. She had a wardrobe worth more than she earned in a year, an agreement that would solve all her financial problems, and the prospect of living, even temporarily, in a world that had always seemed unreachable to her. But more than that, she had the disturbing sensation that she was beginning to care about Elijah in a way that went far beyond the professional. The way he looked at her, how he talked to her, how he seemed to really see her, was awakening feelings that she had buried a long time ago. Hannah lay down on the small, uncomfortable bed, but her thoughts were miles away in an elegant apartment, where photographs of a dead woman watched everything with eternal smiles. She wondered if she was making a terrible mistake, if she was getting involved in something much bigger and more complicated than she had imagined. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was the expression on Elijah's face when he said she was important to him. And for the first time in years, Hannah fell asleep with a smile on her face. On the following Friday, Hannah was standing in front of the bathroom mirror in her small room, trying to recognize the woman who looked back at her. The dress that Elijah had ordered was perfect, a navy blue model that enhanced her eyes and fit her body as if it had been painted on her. The shoes were high enough to add elegance without compromising balance, and the makeup she had learned to apply through YouTube tutorials finally looked professional. But beneath all that superficial elegance, Hannah was terrified. The driver arrived punctually at 7 o'clock, and during the journey to the hotel where the event would be held, Hannah tried to mentally practice the conversations she might have. Elijah had given her a summary of the main guests: renowned doctors, healthcare business executives, some media personalities. She had memorized names and basic information, but still felt like an actress trying to memorize a script in a foreign language. The Plaza Hotel had been rented for the occasion, and Hannah was impressed with the elegant decoration of the main hall: round tables with elaborate floral arrangements, soft lighting that created an intimate atmosphere, waiters circulating with trays of champagne and sophisticated canapes. Elijah was waiting for her at the entrance of the hall, and when he saw her, Hannah noticed something change in his expression. He observed her from head to toe with an intensity that made her blush, and when he approached to greet her, whispered in her ear, "You are stunning." "Thank you," she murmured back, breathing in his cologne and feeling a shiver run down her spine. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "As ready as possible." Elijah led her into the hall, and Hannah immediately felt the gazes turn to them. There was an almost physical quality to the attention they received, people turning subtly to observe, conversations lowering in tone while curious eyes followed them. "Is it always like this?" Hannah whispered. "Not always. But this is the first time I've appeared at a social event with someone since—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Hannah understood. They were immediately approached by an older man with grey hair and a professional smile. "Elijah, what a pleasure to see you here, and this must be the Hannah we've heard so much about." Hannah felt a moment of panic. They had heard about her? How? Elijah noticed her tension and placed his hand gently on her back, a reassuring gesture. That helped her regain her composure. "Hannah, this is Dr. Robert Mendez, director of Mount Sinai Hospital. Robert, my girlfriend, Hannah Davis." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Mendez," Hannah said, extending her hand and trying to sound natural. "The pleasure is all mine. Elijah is very reserved about his personal life, so we were all curious to meet the woman who finally convinced him to return to the land of the living." Hannah smiled, but internally she was processing the implications of the comment. It was obvious that Elijah's absence from social events had been noticed and commented upon. "Well, he's a man worth waiting for," she responded, looking at Elijah with what she hoped looked like genuine affection. During the next hour, Hannah was introduced to dozens of people whose names she desperately tried to memorize. She followed Elijah's advice, asking questions about people's work and interests, smiling at the appropriate moments, and gradually began to relax when she realized that most people were more interested in talking about themselves than in interrogating her. But it was during dinner that things got more complicated. Hannah was sitting next to Elijah at a table with 8 other guests, including a woman of about 50 called Dr. Patricia Almeida, who clearly knew Elijah for a long time and wasn't making any effort to hide her curiosity about Hannah. "So, Hannah," Dr. Patricia said during the second course, "Elijah told me you met recently. How did that happen?" Hannah almost choked on her wine. They had rehearsed an answer to this question, but in the pressure of the moment her mind went completely blank. "Well," she began, buying time, "it was one of those things that happen when you least expect. We met at an art exhibition." Elijah smoothly intervened. "Hannah has an exceptional eye for contemporary art." "How interesting." Dr. Patricia leaned forward. "Which exhibition? I love contemporary art too." Hannah felt panic rise in her throat. She knew absolutely nothing about contemporary art, much less about recent exhibitions in New York. "It was a smaller exhibition," she said vaguely. "Local artists, you know how it is." "Actually," Elijah said, placing his hand over Hannah's in a gesture that seemed intimate and protective, "Hannah is very modest. She has impressive knowledge about contemporary American art." Hannah gently squeezed his hand, a sign of gratitude that he immediately understood. "How lucky you are, Elijah," said another man at the table. Beauty and intelligence are a rare combination. I know, Elijah replied, looking directly at Hannah. I'm a very lucky man. There was something in the way he said this, in the intensity of the look they exchanged, that made Hannah momentarily forget they were just acting. For an instant it seemed genuine, as if he really considered himself lucky to be with her. The rest of the dinner passed without major incidents, but Hannah was exhausted from the effort of maintaining the facade. Each conversation was a potential minefield, each question an opportunity to make a mistake that could destroy the carefully constructed story they were selling. It was only when they were dancing, something she hadn't anticipated and wasn't prepared for, that Hannah realized how things were getting complicated in unexpected ways. The music was slow, a romantic ballad that created an intimate atmosphere even in the middle of 200 people. Elijah held her close, one hand on her waist, the other intertwined with hers. Hannah could feel the warmth of his body through the thin fabric of the dress, could hear the sound of his breathing near her ear. "You're doing perfectly," he murmured as they moved slowly across the dance floor. "I don't seem like a total fraud." "Not at all. You're natural, elegant, charming." He made her spin slowly before pulling her back close to him. "All the qualities I expected and some I didn't expect." "Like what?" "Like the way you make me forget this is just theater." Hannah raised her eyes to meet his, and what she saw there made her lose her breath. It wasn't the calculated expression of a man playing a role. It was something deeper, truer, more dangerous. "Elijah." "I know," he said softly. "I didn't expect this either." They continued dancing in silence, each lost in thoughts they didn't dare express aloud. Hannah was painfully aware of every point of contact between their bodies, of each time his breath touched her neck, of how safe and protected she felt in his arms. When the music ended, they separated reluctantly, but Elijah kept her hand in his for longer than would be necessary. "We need to go," he finally said. "You have to work early tomorrow." During the way back home, they maintained a superficial conversation about the event, who Hannah had met, how she had felt, what adjustments they would need to make for the next event. But there was an underlying tension, a mutual awareness of what had happened on the dance floor. When they arrived at Hannah's building, Elijah again accompanied her to the door. But this time, when she turned to say goodbye, he was closer than she expected. "Hannah," he said, his voice lower and hoarser than normal. "Yes?" "This agreement. It's becoming more complicated than either of us anticipated." Hannah nodded, not trusting her own voice. "We need to keep things professional," he continued, but his hand rose to touch her face gently. "For both our sakes." "I know," she whispered. But even as she said it, Hannah leaned slightly into his touch. Her eyes closed for a moment, and when she opened them, they found Elijah watching her with an intensity that made her tremble. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to kiss her. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes dropping to her lips, and Hannah felt her heart race vertiginously. But then he pulled away, letting his hand fall to his side. "Good night, Hannah." "Good night." Hannah ran up the stairs, her heart still beating erratically. When she reached her room, she went straight to the window and looked down in time to see Elijah still standing on the sidewalk, looking up in the direction of her window. They stared at each other across the distance and darkness for a long moment, two people who were discovering that pretending to have feelings could be more dangerous than actually feeling them. When Elijah finally got into the car and left, Hannah remained at the window for a long time, unconsciously touching the spot where he had touched her face and wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life by accepting that agreement. Because it was becoming increasingly clear that what was growing between them wasn't part of the script, and that made everything infinitely more dangerous. The 2 weeks following the gala dinner were a whirlwind of social events and disturbing discoveries. Hannah found herself being introduced to a world that functioned with unwritten rules, where every gesture had meaning and every word was weighed before being uttered. But more than that, she began to realize that her curiosity about Claire was becoming a dangerous obsession. It all started innocently. During a business lunch at an elegant Japanese restaurant, Hannah overheard a conversation between two women at the next table. They were talking about a mutual old friend, mentioning how poor Claire Carson had been such a delicate soul, so fragile in the last years of her life. One of them commented that it had been a tragedy foretold, while the other agreed, saying that Elijah tried everything, but some problems are too big even for money to solve. Hannah pretended not to be listening, but every word lodged in her mind like thorns. Elijah had said that Claire had died from depression, but there was something in the tone of those women that suggested a more complicated story. That night, alone in her small room, Hannah did something she knew she shouldn't do. She searched for Claire Carson on the internet. What she found was disturbing and fascinating at the same time. Claire had been much more than just a rich businessman's wife. She was the daughter of a traditional New York family, had a psychology degree from Columbia University, and had worked for years at an NGO that cared for abandoned children. The photos Hannah found showed a vibrant and engaged woman, always smiling at charity events, always surrounded by children who clearly adored her. But it was in the more recent articles, those published in the year before Claire's death, that Hannah began to notice a change. The photos showed a visibly thinner woman, with smiles that didn't reach her eyes. In an interview for a social magazine, Claire had talked about the importance of finding balance between personal life and social responsibilities, but her words seemed to have a weight that went beyond the obvious. The most disturbing article was a small note published in the New York Times, just 3 months before Claire's death. It was a short text about an incident at a charity event where Claire had felt unwell and needed to leave the venue early. The note mentioned that she had been seen visibly upset after a discussion with her husband in the hotel parking lot. Hannah closed the laptop with her heart racing. There was something very wrong with the version of the story that Elijah had told, and she was beginning to suspect that Claire's death had not been just the result of an inexplicable depression. But it was during the third social event, a cocktail party for the launch of a new hospital, that Hannah had her first real clue about what had happened. She was in the ladies' room, touching up her lipstick, when she heard two older women talking in the stalls next to her. "It's strange to see Elijah with someone new after so long," said a voice that Hannah recognized as Dr. Margaret Santos, a cardiologist she had met the week before. "Especially someone." "So different from Claire," replied the other voice. "This Hannah seems much more strong, independent." "I hope so." Poor Claire was too delicate to withstand Elijah's intensity. He was always very possessive. Possessive is a polite word. I would say obsessive. Remember how he controlled her every move in the last years, who she could talk to, where she could go, what events she could attend alone. Hannah felt her blood freeze in her veins. "It was sick," continued the first voice. And everyone pretended it was love, as if isolation was synonymous with protection. "At least this Hannah seems to have her own personality. I hope she can better handle his peculiarities." The women left the bathroom, leaving Hannah alone with thoughts that swirled in her mind like a hurricane. Possessive, obsessive, controlling. These words echoed in her head as she tried to reconcile the image of the gentle and attentive man she knew with the portrait she had just heard. When she returned to the main hall, she found Elijah talking with a group of businessmen near the bar. He smiled when he saw her approach, automatically putting his arm around her waist in a gesture that she had begun to accept as natural. But now, after what she had heard, the touch seemed slightly firmer, more possessive than comforting. "Where were you?" he asked softly, leaning to whisper in her ear. "In the bathroom," she replied, watching him more carefully. "Why?" "No reason. I just worry when you disappear." The words were said lightly, but there was something in Elijah's eyes that made Hannah remember the conversations she had heard. He worried when she disappeared. How long had she been gone? 5 minutes? 10 at most? "Elijah," she said carefully, "do you trust me?" The question seemed to take him by surprise. "Of course I trust you. Why do you ask?" "Nothing specific. Just sometimes I get the impression that you get nervous when I'm not around." Elijah studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "Hannah, We're in public. These people are watching our every move, analyzing every interaction. If I seem attentive to your movements, it's because I need to be. Our credibility depends on appearing to be a united couple. It was a rational explanation, but something in his tone didn't completely convince her. Hannah nodded and smiled, returning to the role of dedicated girlfriend, but a seed of doubt had been planted in her mind. In the days that followed, Hannah began to pay attention to small details that previously went unnoticed. The way Elijah always knew where she was and who she was talking to during events. How he subtly interrupted her whenever a conversation became too personal or intimate with other people. How his questions about her day when she worked at the bar seemed to have an investigative precision that went beyond casual curiosity. But it was during the preparation for the trip to Paris that Hannah had her first real demonstration of Elijah's controlling nature. "It's going to be an important business trip," he explained during a dinner at his apartment. "I'm closing a deal with a French group for expansion in Europe. There will be formal dinners, strategic meetings, and some social events where your presence will be crucial. How long will we be there?" "A week." "And Hannah?" Elijah paused, carefully choosing his words. "It's going to be different from New York. We'll be staying in the same suite, sharing the same space 24 hours a day. We'll need to be even more convincing as a couple." Hannah felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. The idea of spending an entire week with Elijah, away from the social pressure of New York, was both terrifying and attractive. "What kind of expectations do you have?" she asked carefully. "None different from what we've already established, just that we're comfortable with each other, that we seem natural together." Elijah leaned forward, taking her hand across the table. "Hannah, I know this is becoming more complex than we initially planned." "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean." His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her blush. "What's happening between us wasn't in the original script." Hannah felt her heart race. It was the first time either of them had openly acknowledged that feelings were exceeding the limits of the professional agreement. "And is that a problem?" she asked softly. "It could be. Or it could be the best thing that's happened to us in a long time." Elijah gently squeezed her hand, and Hannah felt that familiar electric charge run through her arm. They stared at each other for a long moment, two people standing at the edge of an emotional precipice, knowing that the next step would change everything between them. "Paris," he finally said, "will decide a lot for us." The trip to Paris was a surreal experience for Hannah. She had never been on a plane, much less in business class of an international airline. Elijah had arranged everything: passport, visas, clothes suitable for the European climate, with an efficiency that demonstrated he was used to controlling all aspects of important situations. During the 7-hour flight, they talked about superficial matters: the business Elijah would conduct, the places they would visit, the people they would meet. But Hannah could feel an underlying tension, a mutual awareness that they were heading into unknown territory in their relationship. The hotel where they stayed was the kind of place Hannah had only seen in movies, the George V, with its opulent decoration and impeccable service. The presidential suite that Elijah had reserved was larger than any apartment Hannah had ever lived in, with 2 separate bedrooms, an elegant living room, and a spectacular view of the Eiffel Tower. "It's amazing," Hannah whispered, walking to the window and observing the city stretching at her feet. "It's just a hotel," Elijah said, but there was a smile in his voice that suggested pleasure in seeing her reaction. "For you, maybe. For me, it's like being in a dream." Elijah approached, standing behind her at the window. Hannah could feel the warmth of his body, the familiar smell of his cologne mixed with something that was uniquely him. "Hannah," he said softly, "I want you to know that, regardless of what happens this week, I'm grateful you're here." She turned to face him and was surprised by the vulnerability she saw in his eyes. "Why does it seem like you're saying goodbye to me?" "Because maybe I am." He raised his hand to touch her face gently. "This week will reveal a lot about who we really are, and I'm afraid you won't like what you discover." Elijah, but he had already moved away, picking up his briefcase and heading for his bedroom. Rest a bit, we have dinner with the French at 8. Hannah was left alone in the living room, unconsciously touching the spot where he had touched her face, and wondering what secrets he was hiding that made him so afraid of her reaction. The first 3 days in Paris were a carefully choreographed dance of business and social representation. Hannah accompanied Elijah to meetings, where she sat elegantly beside him, smiling at the appropriate moments and making polite conversation during the breaks. She met French businessmen and their wives, participated in dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, and gradually began to feel more comfortable playing the role of companion to an international CEO. But it was during the nights when they returned to the suite after social commitments that Hannah began to notice subtle changes in Elijah's behavior. He became more restless, more silent, often staying up late working on his laptop or making calls to New York. On the 4th night, Hannah woke up around 2 in the morning with thirst. She quietly left her room, heading for the suite's kitchen to get a glass of water. That's when she heard it. It was a low sound, almost inaudible, coming from Elijah's room. At first, Hannah thought he was talking on the phone, but when she listened more carefully, she realized they were sobs. Elijah was crying. Hannah approached his bedroom door, which was ajar. Through the small opening, she could see him sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs that seemed to be torn from the depths of his soul. "Claire," she heard him murmur, "I'm sorry, my love. Sorry for everything." Hannah's heart broke hearing the raw pain in his voice, but at the same time, a part of her felt like an intruder, observing a moment of vulnerability that wasn't meant for her. She was about to move away when she heard Elijah speak again. "I should have listened to you. Should have understood that you just wanted freedom." His voice was choked, almost unrecognizable, "But I was so afraid of losing you that I ended up destroying you." Hannah was paralyzed. Those words confirmed her worst suspicions about what had happened to Claire. "Now she's here," Elijah continued, speaking as if Claire could hear him. "And she's everything you were and everything you could never be. Strong, independent, alive. And I'm in love with her, Claire. I'm in love with her, and it kills me because it means you're really gone." Hannah felt tears burn her eyes. The pain in Elijah's voice was visceral, but his words revealed a truth that she wasn't prepared to face. He was in love with her. But he was also using that feeling as a way to process the loss of Claire. She moved silently away from the door and returned to her room, but couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Elijah's words echoed in her mind, mixing with the conversations she had heard in New York and the information she had found on the internet. When she got up the next morning, she found Elijah in the living room, drinking coffee and reading newspapers as if nothing had happened. He smiled. When he saw her, the same warm smile as always, but Hannah could now see the mask behind the expression. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "More or less," she answered honestly. "And you?" "As always." But Hannah noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. During breakfast, she fought against the impulse to confront him about what she had heard. Part of her wanted to offer consolation, to show that she understood his pain, but another part was frightened by the implications of what she had discovered. It was during the business lunch that day that Hannah made a decision that would change everything between them. They were in an elegant restaurant in the 7th arrondissement with a view of the Seine. Elijah was involved in a complex discussion about financial structures with the French businessman, and Hannah found herself observing him with new eyes. He was undeniably attractive when he was in his professional element, confident, articulate, commanding the attention of everyone at the table. But now she could also see the cracks in the facade, the moments when his smile didn't reach his eyes, the way his fingers nervously drummed on the table when he thought no one was looking. This was a deeply wounded man who had built an emotional prison around himself and was now trying to build one around her too. And Hannah realized that despite falling in love with him, she couldn't allow this to happen. When they returned to the hotel that afternoon, Hannah was determined to have the conversation she had been avoiding. "Elijah," she said as soon as they entered the suite, "we need to talk." He turned to face her, and something in his expression suggested he had been waiting for this moment. "About what?" About us. About Claire. About what's really happening here. Elijah remained motionless for a long moment, studying her face. What do you want to know? The truth. All of it. Are you sure you want to hear it? Hannah nodded, although her most instinctive part was screaming for her to run away. Elijah went to the sweets bar and served 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to her before sitting in the armchair facing the sofa where she had settled. Claire was... he began, then stopped, taking a large sip of the whiskey. Claire was the kindest person I've ever known, and I destroyed her with my love. Hannah waited in silence, feeling that any interruption would break the moment. When we married, she was vibrant, independent, full of life. She worked with abandoned children, had her own dreams and ambitions, but I was afraid of losing her, afraid that she would realize she deserved someone better than me. So you started to control her. Elijah raised his eyes to meet hers. You heard conversations. Some. And researched about her on the internet. Hannah felt her face heat up. How do you know? Because I would do the same thing if I were in your place. Elijah finished the whiskey in one go. Yes, Hannah, I controlled Claire. It started slowly. Small suggestions about where to go, who to talk to. Then it became more intense. I hired people to report to me where she was, who she talked to, what she did when I wasn't around. Hannah felt nausea rise in her throat. I told myself it was protection, that I was taking care of her, but the truth is that I was slowly suffocating her. Elijah stood up, walking to the window. In the last 2 years of our marriage, Claire was a shadow of who she had been. She stopped working, stopped seeing her friends, stopped leaving the house unless I was with her. And you didn't see what you were doing to her. I saw, but I couldn't stop. Every time I tried to give her space, the fear came back, and I became even more possessive. Hannah stood up, feeling the need to move. How did she die, Elijah? The truth. Elijah closed his eyes, resting his forehead against the cold glass of the window. She killed herself. The words fell into the silence of the sweet like stones in still water, creating shock waves that made Hannah stagger. She took an overdose of sleeping pills. She left a letter explaining that she couldn't stand living in a cage anymore, even if it was a golden cage. Hannah felt tears run down her face. My God, Elijah. The letter was never made public. I have contacts, managed to keep it away from the media. Officially, she died from complications of depression. Elijah turned to face her, and Hannah saw that he was also crying. But the truth is that I killed her. Maybe I didn't put the pills in her mouth, but it was my sick love that drove her to that point. Hannah didn't know what to say. His pain was visceral, genuine, but the truth about Claire was more terrible than she had imagined. Why are you telling me this? She finally asked. Because you deserve to know. And because... He approached her, stopping a few steps away. Because I'm falling in love with you, Hannah. And I'm afraid of doing the same thing again. You're already doing it. The words came out before Hannah could contain them, but it was the truth. The constant questions, the need to know where she was, the way he directed her conversations, all were signs that the patterns that had destroyed Claire were beginning to repeat. Elijah stepped back as if he had been slapped. What do you mean? The questions about my day, the way you get tense when you don't know where I am, how you interrupt conversations that become too personal with other people. Hannah approached him, placing her hands on his shoulders. Elijah, you're doing to me exactly what you did to Claire. No, he said, but his voice had no conviction. Yes, and I can't let this happen, for me and for you. Elijah held her by the arms, his fingers digging into her skin with an intensity that bordered on pain. Hannah, don't leave me, please. I can change, I can be different. Did you say the same thing to Claire? The question hit its target. Elijah released her as if his hands were burning, moving away to the other side of the room. I want to cancel our agreement, Hannah said, her voice firmer than she felt inside. No. Elijah. No. He turned to face her, and there was something dangerous in his eyes. You can't cancel. I can, yes, I'll return the money you've already paid me, and you don't understand. Elijah walked toward her with measured steps, like a predator approaching its prey. You can't leave, Hannah. Not now. Why not? Because I won't let you. The simplicity of the statement was more terrifying than any elaborate threat. Hannah saw in Elijah's eyes the same obsession that had destroyed Claire, and for the first time since she had met him, she felt real fear. You don't have that right, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. I have all the rights. Elijah came even closer, forcing her to back up until her back met the wall. You're mine now, Hannah. My girlfriend, my companion, my responsibility. I'm your employee, nothing more. No. He put his hands on the wall on each side of her head, effectively trapping her. You're much more than that, and you know it. Hannah could feel his breath on her face, could see the dried tears on his cheeks, could feel the desperate intensity of his need. And for a terrible moment, a part of her wanted to surrender, wanted to be consumed by that destructive passion. But then she thought of Claire, of the vibrant woman who had become a shadow before completely giving up on life. Elijah, she said softly, you're scaring me. The words seemed to break the trance he was in. Elijah blinked several times, as if waking from a dream, and then moved away from her as if he had received an electric shock. My God, he whispered, looking at his own hands as if he didn't recognize them. My God, what was I doing? Hannah slid down the wall until she sat on the floor, trembling violently. The same thing you did to Claire. Elijah fell to his knees in front of her, tears running freely down his face. Hannah, forgive me, please forgive me. I didn't want to. I never want to hurt you. I know, she said, although she wasn't sure if she believed it. But you can't help it, can you? I can try. I can go to therapy. I can... Elijah. Hannah held his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. You need help, real professional help. And you need it before trying to have any relationship. And you? Will you leave me? Hannah looked at that man who had become so important to her in such a short time. She saw the genuine pain in his eyes, the desperate love, but also saw the danger he represented. I'm going to end our agreement, she finally said, and you're going to let me go. Because if you truly love me, you won't want me to have the same fate as Claire. Elijah closed his eyes, and Hannah could see the internal battle waged on his face. When he opened them again, there was a painful resolution there. You're right, he said with a broken voice. You're right, and I hate it. They sat on the floor of the Parisian suite, two broken hearts trying to find a way to separate before love destroyed them completely. Outside, the Eiffel Tower shone in the French night, a symbol of romance and fulfilled dreams, while inside the suite, two people struggled against a love that was at the same time the most beautiful and most dangerous thing they had ever experienced. Hannah knew that leaving Elijah would be one of the hardest things she had ever done, but she also knew that staying could be the last decision she would make freely. And that night, as they packed in silence to return to New York on the first available flight, both understood that some forms of love are too destructive to be lived, no matter how much one desires otherwise. The flight back to New York was a silent hell. Hannah and Elijah sat side by side in business class, maintaining the appearance of a normal couple for the other passengers. But between them was an abyss of unspoken words and open wounds that bled in silence. Elijah had tried to approach her a few times during the 7-hour flight, a subtle touch on her hand, a worried whisper asking if she was okay, offers of food or drink that she politely declined. But Hannah could see the desperation growing in his eyes with each rejection, and that scared her more than any display of anger. When they arrived at JFK Airport, the reality of the situation hit Hannah like a punch in the stomach. Elijah had said he would let her go, but had mentioned nothing about how this would happen in practice. She didn't have the money to return the $75,000. She had used almost half to pay off the clinic's debts and some of her own overdue bills. Hannah, Elijah said when they were waiting for the luggage, I need you to understand something. What? She kept her eyes fixed on the conveyor belt, avoiding looking at him. "I can't just cancel our agreement like that. There are implications. Complications that you don't know about." A chill ran down Hannah's spine. "What kind of complications?" "Let's talk at the apartment. There are things in the contract that maybe I didn't fully explain." Hannah turned to face him, and what she saw in his expression confirmed her worst fears. "Elijah, what did you do?" "Nothing illegal," he said quickly. "Just precautions." In town. The car during the journey to his apartment, Hannah tried to process the implications of what Elijah had said. What details of the contract had she ignored in her rush to accept the money? What legal traps might be waiting for her? When they arrived at the apartment, the ghostly presence of Claire seemed even more oppressive than before. The smiling photographs on the shelves now seemed accusatory, as if Claire were watching Hannah commit the same mistakes that had led to her own destruction. "Sit down," Elijah said, gesturing to the living room sofa. "I want to show you something." He disappeared into his office for a few minutes, returning with a folder of documents. Hannah recognized the contract she had signed weeks ago, but now there were other pages attached that she didn't remember seeing. "Clause 15, Elijah said, opening the document to a specific page. "Early termination of the agreement." Hannah read the words on the page, but at first they didn't make sense. Then slowly, understanding formed in her mind like a black cloud. "If either party breaks this agreement before the established term of 6 months," she read aloud, "the defaulting party will be responsible for full reimbursement of the amount received, plus interest and a penalty of 100% of the original value, in addition to compensation for damage to public image in the amount of $500,000. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "This means that if you break the contract now, you owe me approximately $700,000, Elijah completed with a voice that tried to sound apologetic, but that Hannah perceived had a hint of satisfaction. "You tricked me." Her voice came out as a strangled whisper. "I protected you. Hannah, when you read and signed this contract, you were desperate. You would accept anything. So I put these clauses to ensure you would take the agreement seriously. You trapped me." Hannah stood up from the sofa, starting to walk from one side of the room to the other. "Deliberately trapped me in a contract that I can't break." "You can break it. You just have to bear the consequences. Consequences that you know very well I can't pay." Hannah stopped in front of him, her eyes burning with anger. "This is manipulation, Elijah. It's blackmail. It's business." But the way he said it didn't convince even himself. Hannah looked at that man she had begun to love and saw Claire reflected in her own eyes, the same feeling of being trapped, of having her choices removed by someone who claimed to love her. "How much time do I have?" she asked with a deadly calm. "For what?" "To decide what I'm going to do." Elijah hesitated. "Hannah, I don't want you to feel pressured." "How much time, Elijah?" 3 months. 3 months until the original contract date expires." Hannah nodded slowly. 3 months. "But Hannah, if you stay, if we try to make this really work—" "No." The word came out with a firmness that surprised them both. "I won't become Claire, Elijah, no matter what you do to me." She picked up her purse and headed for the door, but his voice stopped her. "Where are you going?" Hannah turned to face him. "Home, to think, to find a way out of this situation without destroying myself in the process." "Hannah, don't." "Follow me, Elijah, and don't look for me. If you truly love me, give me at least that." She left the apartment before he could respond, but she could feel his eyes burning into her back as she waited for the elevator. When the doors closed between them, Hannah finally allowed the tears she had been holding to begin falling. The days that followed were a blur of despair and determination. Hannah returned to work at the Blue Lagoon bar, pretending that her life hadn't changed drastically, that she wasn't trapped in a legal agreement that could financially destroy her for the rest of her life. Mark, the bar owner, asked a few questions about where she had been in the last few weeks, but Hannah gave vague answers about family problems that he accepted without questioning much. It was a relief to be back in an environment where she knew who she was, where the rules were simple and straightforward. But it was during her third night back at work that Hannah realized something was wrong with her body. She was serving a pasidat, table of noisy college students, when a wave of nausea hit her out of nowhere. The smell of alcohol and fried food, which had never bothered her before, suddenly became unbearable. She barely made it to the bathroom before violently vomiting. "Are you okay, honey?" Donna Nancy, the older cook, had noticed her paleness when she returned to the room. "I think it was something I ate," Hannah lied, but at the back of her mind a terrible suspicion was beginning to form. The next morning, Hannah bought a pregnancy test at a pharmacy far from home where no one knew her. She took it in the tiny bathroom of her boarding house, with her hands shaking so much she could barely hold the small plastic object. 2 lines. Positive. Hannah sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried until she had no more tears. She was pregnant, with Elijah's child, the man who was becoming increasingly like what had destroyed Claire, the man she was desperately trying to escape from. The irony was cruel. She had found a way to become even more trapped by him, even more vulnerable to his obsessive need for control. For 3 days, Hannah kept the news to herself, trying to process the implications. A baby would change everything, not just her ability to escape from Elijah, but the entire power dynamic between them. He would use the child as yet another way to control her, another chain to keep her bound. It was during these days of solitary reflection that Hannah made a decision that would change everything. If Elijah wanted to play dirty, so would she. Hannah began her investigation systematically. She knew that Elijah would leave New York for a few days for business meetings in Boston. He had mentioned this in one of the few messages she had responded to since they returned from Paris. It was her chance to find out more about Claire and about the real secrets that Elijah was hiding. On Thursday night, Hannah used the key she still had to the apartment. Elijah had insisted she keep one for emergencies, and silently entered the space that had begun to feel like a golden prison. The apartment was dark and silent, exactly as she expected. Hannah turned on only the necessary lights and began her methodical search. She knew that Elijah was meticulous, organized. If there were secrets about Claire, they would be well guarded, but not impossible to find. It was in the office that she found the first real clue. Behind a bookshelf of economics books, there was a small, discreet door that Hannah had never noticed before. When she opened it, she discovered a small space, almost a closet, that had been converted into a kind of shrine for Claire. The walls were covered with photographs of Claire at different stages of life: child, teenager, young adult, newlywed. There were love letters written by Elijah's own hand, dried flowers kept in small jars, and boxes organized with Claire's personal belongings. But it was at a small desk in the corner of the space that Hannah found what she was looking for. Diary bound in brown leather, with the initials CC engraved on the cover. Hannah opened the diary with trembling hands, instinctively knowing she was about to discover truths that Elijah had never intended to share. The first entries were, "From a happy and in-love woman." Claire wrote about Elijah with admiration and affection, describing the first years of marriage as the happiest of her life. But as Hannah progressed through the pages, she could see the gradual change in tone. March 15, 2018, Elijah was concerned because I arrived home 20 minutes late today. He said he was imagining that something terrible had happened to me. It's sweet that he worries so much, but sometimes I feel like I have to account for every minute of my day. April 22, 2018. Elijah suggested that I stop working at the NGO. He said we don't need the money, and that he prefers to know I'm safe at home. I still don't know what to answer. I love my work, but I also want to keep him at ease. July 10, 2018. I cancelled lunch with Patricia today because Elijah got very nervous about the idea of me going out alone. He said she's a bad influence, that she's always been jealous of our marriage. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should be more careful about who I spend my time with. Hannah continued reading, watching Claire slowly disappear through her own words. The entries became more spaced out, darker, full of justifications for behaviors that were clearly suffocating her. January 3, 2019. I found hidden cameras in the apartment today. Elijah said they're for security, that the area is dangerous, and he needs to know I'm okay when he's not home. It makes sense, I suppose. He just wants to protect me. March 15, 2019. My mother called asking why I don't see her anymore. I didn't know what to say. How to explain that Elijah gets disturbed whenever I go out to visit family. That he says my mother fills my head with negative ideas about our marriage. June 30th, 2019. I tried to talk to Elijah about feeling isolated, about wanting to resume some of my old activities. He cried. He said I was trying to abandon him, that he would die if I left him. How can I hurt him like that? Maybe I'm being selfish. Hannah's tears fell on the pages as she read the visceral account of a woman's emotional destruction. Claire had meticulously documented her own imprisonment, recording each step of the psychological manipulation that Elijah had used to isolate her from the world. But it was the last entries that really broke Hannah's heart. December 10th, 2019. I no longer recognize the woman in the mirror. Where is the Claire who used to laugh, who had dreams, who cared about things beyond making Elijah happy? She disappeared so gradually that I didn't even notice when she was gone. January 22nd, 2020. Elijah installed electronic locks on the C doors. He said it's for security, but I realized I can't leave without him knowing. I can't go to the supermarket. I can't visit the doctor. I can't even walk in the building without him being notified by the system. I'm a prisoner in my own home. February 14th, 2020, Valentine's Day. Elijah gave me a beautiful necklace with a small GPS locator embedded. He said that way he would always know I'm safe. I laughed and thanked him, but inside I was screaming. I can't even pretend anymore that this is love. It's obsession. It's sickness. March 6, 2020. I tried to call my sister today and found out Elijah cancelled my cell phone. He said I was spending too much time on the phone talking about negative things and that it wasn't healthy for our relationship. I'm completely isolated now. It's as if the outside world no longer exists. The penultimate entry was the one that made Hannah sob loudly in the silent room. March 15th, 2020. I thought about running away today. I thought about just running out and never coming back. But where would I go? I no longer have friends. I no longer have work. I no longer have connections with the real world. Elijah created a world where only the two of us exist, and now I don't know how to exist outside of it anymore. Maybe this is the only life I deserve. Maybe I really am too weak to deserve freedom. And the last entry, dated 2 days before Claire's. Death, March 20th, 2020. I can't anymore. I can't keep pretending this is life. Elijah loves me. I know he loves me. But his love is like a carnivorous plant, beautiful on the outside, but slowly devouring me from the inside. He will never let me go, and I no longer have the strength to fight. There is only one way to free myself from this prison, only one way to finally have peace. Forgive me, world. Forgive me for not being strong enough to find another way out. Hannah closed the diary with trembling hands, her heart beating so hard she could hear it in the silence of the apartment. Claire had documented everything, every manipulation, every form of control, every step of her descent into despair. More importantly, she had documented evidence of crimes, hidden cameras without consent, a lock system that effectively kept Claire prisoner, cancellation of services without her knowledge, tracking through hidden devices. Hannah held the diary against her chest, feeling the weight of the responsibility she now carried. Those words were more than just the final testimony of a destroyed woman. They were a weapon that could be used to expose Elijah and prevent him from doing the same thing to another person. To her. Hannah photographed each page of the diary with her cell phone, making sure she had a complete copy before putting it back in the place where she had found it. She searched the rest of the secret sanctuary, finding other disturbing documents. receipts for surveillance equipment, contracts with security companies for residential monitoring, even correspondence with private investigators that Elijah had hired to verify the activities of Claire. When she left the apartment 2 hours later, Hannah had in her hands enough evidence to completely destroy Elijah. Not only his reputation, but possibly his freedom, if the authorities decided that some of his actions constituted crimes. But using this information would mean declaring war against a man who had resources, power, and, as she was beginning to understand, absolutely nothing to lose. The next morning, Hannah scheduled an appointment with a lawyer specializing in civil law. Dr. Richard Moore had a small office, but a solid reputation for handling complex cases involving contracts and personal rights. "Miss Davis," he said after reviewing a copy of the contract that Hannah had brought, "this is an extremely well-crafted document from a legal standpoint. Whoever drafted it knew exactly what they were doing. Is there any way to break it without paying the penalties?" Dr. Moore studied the document for a few more minutes before answering. "Possibly, if we can prove coercion, fraud, or concealment of material information at the time of signing. And if I could prove that the person who made me sign this contract has a history of abusive and manipulative behavior." The lawyer's eyes narrowed with interest. "What kind of behavior?" Hannah took a deep breath. "The kind that led his previous wife to suicide." Dr. Moore leaned forward. "Ms. Davis, do you have evidence of these allegations?" "I do." "Then I believe we have a strategy. But I need to warn you. If we decide to go down this path, it will be a brutal legal battle. Your opponent clearly has significant resources and will not hesitate to use them. And if I don't fight, then you'll remain bound to this contract and to this man for as long as he decides to keep you." Hannah unconsciously touched her abdomen, where a new life was growing, a life that infinitely complicated everything. "Doctor," she said slowly, "what if I were pregnant? How would that affect the situation?" Dr. Moore paused, clearly processing the implications. "It would make everything much more complicated. A child creates permanent legal ties, custody issues, financial responsibilities. And if the father, here's the person mentioned in the contract? Then, Ms. Davis, you'll need more than a good lawyer. You'll need a very careful plan and a lot of courage." That night, Hannah sat in her small room with a decision that would change everything. She had the evidence to destroy Elijah, had legal assistance to break the contract, and had a powerful motivation in the form of the life growing inside her. But she also knew that Elijah wouldn't give up easily. Men like him, men who had built emotional prisons around the people they loved, didn't simply accept defeat. Hannah picked up her cell phone and began typing an email to an investigative journalist whose work she had admired. It was time to tell Claire Carson's story the way she deserved, not as the tragic wife who had succumbed to depression, but as a woman who had been systematically destroyed by an obsessive and possessive love. And it was time to ensure that Hannah Davis didn't follow the same path. As she typed, Hannah felt something she hadn't experienced for a long time: power. For the first time since she had met Elijah, she wasn't reacting to his actions. She was taking the initiative. The war had begun, and this time, Hannah was determined to win. But what she didn't know was that Elijah had already discovered her. Invasion of the apartment. The same cameras and monitoring systems he had used to control Claire had recorded her every move that night. And while she was planning her offensive, he was planning his own strategy to keep her exactly where he wanted, her beside him forever, no matter the cost. The battle between them was just beginning, and both were underestimating the extremes to which the other was willing to go to get what they wanted. Hannah wanted freedom. Elijah wanted Hannah, and only one of them would get what they desired. The 2 months that followed were the most intense in Hannah's life. She had become a strategist, calculating each move as if it were a chess match, where her freedom, and that of her unborn child, depended on the final outcome. The investigative journalist Marcus Sanders had shown extreme interest in Claire's story. During 3 secret meetings in discreet cafes around the city, Hannah had shared all the evidence she had found, including the photographs of the diary and the documents from the hidden sanctuary. Marcus was preparing an explosive article that would be published the day after the annual Carson Holdings Ball, the perfect event for maximum media exposure. But Hannah knew that Elijah wasn't idle. She had noticed subtle changes in her routine that suggested constant surveillance. Cars that regularly appeared near the bar where she worked, strangers asking questions about her to neighbors, silent calls to her cell phone in the middle of the night. Dr. Richard Moore had managed to structure a solid legal strategy based on the evidence about Claire and Elijah's pattern of coercive behavior. They had a real chance of nullifying the contract due to fraud and coercion. But the lawyer had been clear. They would need a dramatic moment to force Elijah into an indefensible position. His company's ball, Dr. Moore had suggested during their last meeting. With all the media present, important investors, public personalities, if we can expose him publicly in that environment, he won't be able to control the narrative afterward. Hannah had agreed, but she knew it would be the most dangerous moment of the entire operation. Elijah would be in his own territory, surrounded by allies with all resources at his disposal. And she would be alone at the center of the hurricane. The pregnancy was beginning to become more evident. Almost 3 months along, Hannah had developed a small curve in her abdomen that loose clothes could still disguise, but she knew she couldn't hide it for much longer. The irony was cruel. She was carrying the child of the man she was trying to escape from, a permanent connection that would make her escape much more complicated. 3 days before the ball, Hannah received a call that made her realize time was running out faster than she had imagined. Hannah. Elijah's voice sounded tired, defeated, but there was something underneath it that made her shiver. We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about, Elijah. I know about the journalist. Hannah's blood froze. I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus Sanders, 3 meetings, the last one at the cafe on 5th Avenue last Tuesday. His voice was strangely calm. I also know about Dr. Richard Moore and about the photographs you took in my apartment. Hannah closed her eyes, feeling the world crumble around her. How did you... The same cameras I used to watch Claire recorded your visit, Hannah. I saw everything. Every drawer you opened, every document you photographed, every page of the diary you read. Then you know that I know the truth. I know that you think you know the truth. Elijah sighed deeply. Hannah, you don't understand the complexity of the situation. Claire was a victim. Hannah's voice came out firmer than she felt. And you were her executioner. Claire was ill, Hannah. She had disorders you can't imagine. I tried to protect her, care for her. You destroyed her. I loved her. The mask of calm finally fell, revealing the raw pain underneath. I loved her more than any man has ever loved a woman, and she killed herself anyway. If that's not proof that I failed to protect her, I don't know what is. Hannah could hear tears in his voice, and for a moment she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Elijah, love shouldn't destroy. Love should liberate. And that's why you have to come to the ball on Friday. What? One last chance, Hannah, for us, to understand what really exists between us, away from all these games, away from this war you've declared. I'm not going to do that, Elijah. I'm not going to put myself in an even more vulnerable position. You will. His voice changed, becoming harder. Because if you don't come, I'll publish the photos. What photos? Of you entering my apartment without authorization. Of you rummaging through my private belongings, photographing confidential documents, breaking and entering, violation of privacy, theft of information. I can have you arrested, Hannah, and once arrested, I can make sure you stay imprisoned for a very long time. Hannah felt nausea rise in her throat. You wouldn't do that. I would do anything to keep you close to me, anything. His voice had become a dangerous whisper. Come to the ball, Hannah. Dance with me one last time. Let me show you that we can make this work. And if I can't convince you, then you'll be free to go. I'll tear up the contract in front of everyone myself. Hannah knew it was a lie, but she also knew she had no choice. All right, I'll go. Good. The dress will be at your place tomorrow. And Hannah? Yes? Wear the necklace that comes with the dress. It's important to me. The call ended, leaving Hannah alone with the certainty that she was walking straight into a trap. But perhaps it was exactly where she needed to be to execute her own plan. The dress that arrived the next day was stunning, a deep red model that perfectly embraced her changing body, with a cut that disguised her early pregnancy. Along with it was a diamond necklace that was clearly a piece of inestimable value. Hannah held the necklace up to the light, observing how the diamonds reflected small rainbows around the room. It was beautiful, but there was something about it that made her feel uncomfortable. When she examined it more closely, she noticed a small electronic device discreetly incorporated into the clasp, probably a GPS tracker, just like the one Elijah had given to Claire. She smiled bitterly. Even knowing she was aware of his methods, he couldn't resist the need to control her. On the night of the ball, Hannah dressed with the care of a soldier preparing for battle. The red dress made her look like a completely different woman from the frightened bartender who had met Elijah months ago. She had become someone stronger, more determined, more dangerous. The necklace was in her purse. She would put it on only at the entrance to the event, so as not to give Elijah reasons to suspect she had discovered the tracking device. Dr. Richard Moore would be present at the ball, disguised as a journalist from a business magazine. The plan was simple. Hannah would go up on stage during Elijah's traditional speech, publicly expose the truth about Claire and about the coercive contract, and then Dr. Moore would enter with a judicial injunction already prepared to nullify the agreement. Marcus Sanders would be present too, ready to release the complete story as soon as Hannah made her public revelations. Elijah's fall would be spectacular and definitive. The Plaza Hotel had again been chosen for the event, but this time Hannah didn't feel intimidated by the opulence of the environment. She now knew the secrets that hid behind all that superficial elegance. Elijah was waiting for her at the entrance to the main hall, devastatingly elegant in a black tuxedo. When he saw her, something changed in his expression, a mixture of admiration, desire, and something darker that Hannah couldn't completely identify. "You look impossibly beautiful," he said, kissing her hand in a gesture that seemed too intimate for the public environment. "Thank you," Hannah forced a smile. "You also look very elegant." "The necklace," he said, noticing she wasn't wearing it. Hannah opened her purse and took out the piece, allowing him to place it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin as he closed the clasp, sending shivers down her spine that she tried to ignore. "Perfect," he murmured in her ear. "Now you're complete." The hall was filled with the same people Hannah had met at previous events, but this time she saw them with different eyes. Many of them probably knew at least part of the truth about Claire, but had chosen the complicit silence of high society. During the first hour, Hannah and Elijah circulated around the hall, making the usual social conversations. But she could feel the tension growing in him as the night progressed. His smiles were more forced, his hand on her back firmer, his eyes more vigilant. "Hannah," he said when they were momentarily alone near the bar, "I want you to know that, regardless of what happens tonight, I don't regret anything we experienced together. Not even the lies, the manipulations. Not even the things I did for love." He took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "You brought me back to life, Hannah. After Claire, after all that pain, you showed me it was possible to feel again. And you showed me how love can be dangerous when it becomes obsession." Elijah studied her for a long moment. "Is that how you see me? As an obsession?" "I don't know how I see you anymore, Elijah. I just know that I need to be free, to discover who I am away from your influence. And if I say I can't let you go, then you'll prove that you haven't learned anything from Claire's death." The mention of his ex-wife's name made Elijah recoil as if he had been slapped. His eyes darkened, and Hannah saw a flash of the dangerous man who hid behind the civilized facade. "Don't talk about her," he said with a low and threatening voice. "You didn't know her. You don't know what she was capable of." "I know exactly what she was capable of. I read every word she wrote about you, about what you did to her." "You read—" Elijah stopped, processing the implications. "The diary," Every page, every account of how you systematically destroyed a woman who loved you. I saved her. His voice rose slightly, attracting curious glances from other guests. He immediately lowered his tone. Claire was self-destructive, depressive. I tried to protect her from herself. You imprisoned her, physically and emotionally. And now you want to do the same thing to her. The new voice made them turn. Dr. Richard Moore had approached, holding a glass of champagne and smiling as if he were making casual conversation. Who are you? Elijah asked, clearly suspicious. Dr. Richard Moore, Ms. Davis's attorney. I've come to deliver a judicial notification. Elijah looked from Hannah to the lawyer, his face pale with anger. What kind of notification? Annulment of the contract. Due to coercion and fraud, plus an action for moral damages based on the documented pattern of abusive behavior in your previous relationship. You can't prove anything. Actually, Hannah said, taking her cell phone from her purse, we can prove everything. She showed some of the photographs of Claire's diary that she had kept as evidence. Elijah looked at the images and Hannah saw something break in his expression. How dare you? He advanced a step toward her, but Dr. Moore intervened. Mr. Carson, I suggest you maintain your composure. We're in public, and any aggressive action will only strengthen our case. Elijah looked around, noticing that some people had begun to pay attention to the tense conversation. He forced a smile, but Hannah could see the fury burning in his eyes. You think this will work? He said softly. Do you think you can publicly destroy me and walk away unscathed? We think you've already destroyed yourself, Hannah replied. We're just going to make it public. It was at that moment that the Master of Ceremonies announced that Elijah would take the stage for his annual speech. Hannah saw a perfect opportunity present itself. Go, she said to Elijah, make your speech. But when you finish, it will be my turn to speak. Elijah looked at her for a long moment, and Hannah saw something change in his expression. The anger was replaced by a dangerous calm that frightened her more than any display of fury. All right, he said calmly. Let's see who has the final word tonight. He took the stage with his usual confidence, greeting the audience and beginning his traditional speech about the company's successes in the previous year. But Hannah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly searched for her in the crowd. That's when she realized something was wrong. Very wrong. Elijah interrupted the prepared speech in the middle of a sentence and looked directly at her. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice loaded with an emotion that made the entire hall go silent. Tonight is not just about business. It's about truths, about love, about second chances. Hannah felt her heart race. This wasn't part of the plan. I want to officially introduce to you the woman who saved my life. Elijah extended his hand toward her. Hannah Davis, the woman who brought me back to life after years of darkness. Polite applause echoed through the hall, but Hannah could feel the confusion in the audience. This wasn't a normal corporate speech. Hannah, come here, please. She shook her head, but Elijah continued. You see, my wife Claire killed herself 5 years ago. And since then I've lived like a walking dead, functioning but not really existing, until this extraordinary woman came into my life. Murmurs began to spread through the crowd. Some people took out their cell phones, starting to record. Hannah found herself walking toward the stage, not because she wanted to, but because she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment to tell her own version of the story. When she climbed onto the stage, Elijah greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This woman, he continued, putting his arm around her waist, accepted an agreement with me. An agreement that began as business but transformed into something much deeper. Hannah approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, what Mr. Carson isn't telling you is that... What she isn't telling you, Elijah interrupted her, pulling her closer to him, is that she's pregnant with my child. The hall exploded in shocked murmurs. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. How did he know? But she also isn't telling you, Elijah continued, his voice becoming darker, that she's trying to leave me, that she's trying to take my child away from me. Hannah tried to move away, but his hand on her waist became like an iron claw. "Elijah, let me go," she whispered. "I can't do that, my love. I can't let you go." He spoke quietly enough that only she could hear, but then returned to the microphone. "You see, I made terrible mistakes in the past, mistakes that cost the life of the woman I loved most, but I won't make the same mistakes again." Hannah noticed there was something in the pocket of his jacket, a small but distinctive volume that made her realize the situation had become much more dangerous than she had imagined. "Elijah," she whispered, "don't do this. Not here. Not like this." "This woman saved my life," he told the audience, ignoring her, "but she doesn't know that I'm willing to lose everything, including freedom, if it's the only way to hold on to her." The silence in the hall was deafening. People were clearly realizing that something very wrong was happening on stage. Elijah leaned in to whisper in her ear, "You're not leaving, Hannah, because now you're my truth, and I am your abyss." It was at that moment that Hannah realized she needed to make a decision that would change everything. She could try to run away, expose him publicly as planned, and risk him doing something desperate, or she could try a completely different approach. Hannah approached the microphone, her voice trembling but determined. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "Mr. Carson is right about some things. I am pregnant, and I do love him." Elijah looked at her with genuine surprise. "But," Hannah continued, "loving someone doesn't mean accepting being controlled by them. Loving someone doesn't mean losing your identity or your freedom." She turned to face Elijah directly. "5 years ago, your wife Claire killed herself because she felt so trapped, so suffocated by your possessive love, that death seemed the only escape. She left a diary documenting how you systematically destroyed her autonomy, her independence, her very essence." Shocked murmurs echoed through the hall. Elijah tried to grab the microphone, but Hannah held it firmly. "But I'm not Claire," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I won't disappear silently. I won't let fear paralyze me, and I won't allow you to do to our child what you did to us." "Hannah," Elijah tried to interrupt her. "No." She moved away from him. "It's my turn to speak. Elijah, I love you. I love the gentleman I met at that bar, the vulnerable man who cried for Claire in the early hours, the man who made me feel important for the first time in my life. But I can't love the man who tried to control me, who blackmails me, who sees love as possession." Tears were now running down her face, but her voice remained firm. "If you truly love me, if you want me to stay, if you want to be part of your child's life, then you need to change. You need professional help. You need to learn that true love is about freedom, not control." Elijah stood motionless on the stage, tears running down his face, looking at Hannah as if seeing her for the first time. "I'll go to therapy with you," Hannah continued. "I'll work with you to build something healthy, but only if you tear up that contract now in front of everyone, and promise you'll never try to control me again." The hall was in absolute silence. Hundreds of people watching a personal drama unfold before their eyes. Elijah looked at Hannah for a long moment, then at the audience, then at his own hands. Slowly, he took a copy of the contract from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Hannah," he said with a broken voice, "do you really love me, even after everything I did? I love the man you can be, the man who chooses to be better instead of repeating the same mistakes." Elijah looked at the document in his hands, then slowly tore it piece by piece, letting the fragments fall to the floor of the stage. "I choose to be better," he said, "for you, for our child, for myself." Hannah approached him, taking his face between her hands. "Then let's build something new together, but the right way this time." Elijah kissed her softly, a kiss full of tears and regret and hope. When they separated, he spoke into the microphone one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for turning our annual gala into public therapy, but sometimes the truth needs an audience to become real." He paused, looking at Hannah. "My name is Elijah Carson, and I'm a man who almost destroyed 2 women I loved because I confused control with care. But this extraordinary woman showed me that it's not too late to change, to be better, to love the right way. Hesitant applause began in some parts of the hall, gradually growing until it became a complete ovation. 6 months later, Hannah was sitting in the office of Dr. Maria Ramirez, one of the best couples therapists in New York, watching Elijah talk about his progress in controlling anxiety and possessive impulses. "It's been difficult," he was saying, "deconstructing patterns that I built over years. But having Hannah as a partner instead of a prisoner has made all the difference." Hannah smiled, unconsciously caressing her abdomen that now clearly showed her 7-month pregnancy. "And you, Hannah?" Dr. Ramirez asked. "How have you been feeling about your progress?" "Cautiously optimistic," Hannah answered honestly. "There are days when I see the wonderful man Elijah can be, and there are days when I need to remind him of the boundaries we've established. But the difference is that now he listens." "What changed?" the therapist asked Elijah. "Almost losing Hannah showed me that fear isn't love, that if you truly love someone, you need to be willing to let them go if that's what they need to be. Happy." Elijah took Hannah's hand, and paradoxically it was only when I stopped trying to hold her that she chose to stay. After the session, they walked together through Central Park, enjoying the sunny afternoon of a Saturday in New York. "How are you feeling about the move?" Hannah asked. Elijah had sold the apartment full of memories of Claire and bought a spacious house in a quieter neighborhood where they had begun to build their own memories. "Liberating," he answered. "For 5 years, I lived like a ghost in my own past. Now I'm building a future." They sat on a bench near the lake, watching. Families with children feeding the ducks. "Sometimes I still have nightmares," Hannah admitted, "about returning to that dynamic of control, about losing myself again." "And I still have impulses," Elijah admitted as well. "I still feel anxiety when you go out alone. I still want to know where you are every moment. But now I recognize these feelings for what they are. My problems to solve, not reasons to control you." Hannah leaned against him, feeling the baby kick in response to the warmth and movement. "Our child is approving the conversation," she said, laughing. Elijah placed his hand on her abdomen, smiling when he felt another kick. "It will be different with him," he said. "Or her. I'll love without suffocating, protect without imprisoning, be present without being possessive." "We will," Hannah corrected, "together." 3 months later, Hannah gave birth to a girl they named Hope, a name that represented everything they had built together after almost destroying each other. On Claire's first anniversary, instead of visiting the cemetery alone as he did, every year Elijah took Hannah and little Hope to place flowers on the grave. "Thank you," he said quietly to the marble headstone, "for teaching me through your pain how not to love. Hannah taught me how to truly love." Hannah held his hand as he cried, not tears of guilt or despair, but of relief and gratitude. "She would have liked to see you happy," Hannah said softly. "She would have liked you," Elijah replied. "She would have admired your strength, your courage to confront me when I needed confronting." 2 years after the fateful ball, Elijah and Hannah married in a small and intimate ceremony. It wasn't a grand wedding, just close friends, family, and little Hope running among the guests, in her pink dress. The vows they exchanged were different from the traditional. "Hannah," Elijah said, "I promise to love you without possessing you, to protect you without imprisoning you, to support you without controlling you. I promise that our daughter will grow up seeing healthy love based on mutual respect and freedom." "Elijah," Hannah responded, "I promise to love you without fear, to challenge you when necessary, to support you in your journey of growth. I promise that together we'll build a home based on trust, not control." Dr. Richard Moore, who had become a dear friend, was the one who married them, an irony that everyone appreciated. "I rarely see a couple who fought so brilliantly against their own demons to find true love," he said during the ceremony. "You've proven that it's possible to break destructive cycles and build something beautiful in their place." That night in their new home, with Hope sleeping peacefully in her crib, Hannah and Elijah sat in the garden they had planted together. "Do you regret it?" Hannah asked. "Everything we went through to get here?" Elijah considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain I caused. I regret the mistakes I made, but I don't regret the path that brought us here, because it made us the people we are today. Hannah smiled, watching the stars in the clear sky. Claire left me something in the drawer of the old dresser, she said after a moment. What? A letter, addressed to the next woman Elijah will love. Elijah turned to face her, surprised. You never told me that. I wasn't ready before, but I think now is the right time. Hannah took a yellowed envelope from her pocket. She wrote this a few months before she died. It's as if she knew there would be a next woman and wanted to leave a warning and a hope. Elijah took the letter with trembling hands and read aloud, "To the woman who comes after me. If you're reading this, it means Elijah has found someone new to love. I hope you're stronger than I was, braver, more determined to maintain your own identity. Elijah is not a bad man. He's a man with fear of abandonment so deep that he suffocates the people he loves, trying to ensure they never leave him. I didn't have the courage to fight against this. I hope you do. If you can break the pattern, if you can teach him that true love gives wings instead of building cages, then my death will not have been completely in vain. Be strong, be brave, and mainly be free. With love and hope. Claire." Tears were running down both their faces when Elijah finished reading. "She knew," Hannah whispered. "She knew you could change, that you just needed the right person to challenge you." "She gave us her blessing," Elijah said, carefully folding the letter. "Even after everything I did, she still had enough hope to believe I could be better." They embraced in the garden under the stars, two survivors of their own internal battles, united not by obsession or need, but by conscious choice and mature love. From the baby's room came the soft sound of Hope waking up, calling for her parents. "Our turn," Hannah said, standing up. "Our turn," Elijah agreed, following her into the house. And for the first time in their lives, both fully understood what it meant to love and be loved the right way, with freedom, with respect, with the confidence that true love doesn't need chains to last forever. The sound of Hope's laughter echoed through the house, a promise that the next generation would grow up knowing only the kind of love that liberates, never the kind that binds. And so, in the simplicity of an ordinary night in a home filled with healthy love, the story of Hannah and Elijah found its true happy ending, not because all problems were solved, but because both had learned that true love is a daily choice to be better, for oneself and for the loved one. The abyss had become a bridge. The prison had become a home, and fear had transformed into hope.